The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Budget Committee will now begin.
Good afternoon. I am going to start this meeting as we just barely have a quorum of our members, which is unfortunate, but we did just get done with a full council meeting that was quite long. And I think that sometimes these beginning prepared remarks are more for the public, and that my colleagues do kind of understand the focus and where we're at in the context of this conversation. My name is Lene Palmisano. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee, and I'll call to order this regular meeting for Friday, July 17th. Before we proceed, I'll note for the record that this meeting has remote participation by council members and city staff pursuant to Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.021, due to the declared state of local public health emergency. At this time, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify the presence of a quorum. Mr. Clerk.
Councilmember Reich.
Present.
Gordon.
Here.
Cunningham.
Present.
Ellison.
Present.
Goodman.
Present.
Jenkins.
Here.
Kano. Bender.
Here.
Schrader.
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Fletcher.
Here.
Councilmember Kano. Chair Palmisano.
Present.
There are 11 members present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Colleagues, our meeting today is our markup session. The entire focus of this meeting is to consider the amendments which council members may bring forward on the revisions proposed to our 2020 budget by the mayor, proposed by the mayor. Before we do anything else, I want to express my appreciation to all of you for the thoughtful work you've done to carefully explore what the mayor proposed, how those reductions will impact our city enterprise, and more importantly, how those reductions will impact our community. It's worth repeating that Minneapolis faces unprecedented challenges. These challenges demand difficult, even painful, decisions from us as we examine how to respond in a way that protects and preserves the necessary core functions of government while respecting the shared values to which we've committed ourselves in meeting the needs day to day of our constituents. As chair of this budget committee, I want to continue to level set all of us that the cuts we have already made, as well as the cuts we will be making during this revised budget for the current fiscal year, are just the beginning. We must be thinking of the long term. We know that in less than a month, we will be receiving the mayor's proposed budget for next year, and it will be an austere proposal, and we will have bigger challenges here as we look to the future. The revision of the 2020 budget was intended to focus on targeted reductions that will help the city address an immediate budget shortfall before the end of this year. To the extent possible, we want to avoid massive structural changes for the moment, because those bigger changes, which we know are needed and which are coming, require a bit more thought, analysis, and finesse. Quite frankly, it requires more time to address the complexity of pulling apart major operating chunks of an enterprise that's this big. So we're hoping to address those significant structural changes as part of the 2021 budget. These revisions are still just about plugging holes in this year's budget. Reform, restructure, right sizing, those will undoubtedly be the themes of the 2021 budget, and we will address those challenges together at the appropriate time. As I've done before, I want to start with an overview of the process I intend to follow for this meeting. Then I'll take any immediate questions from my colleagues about that process, and once we have that clarity, I'll ask Director Intramural to bring the proposed amendments forward in the order that he and I have created. These are ordered in the agenda packet that was sent to all council members this morning while we were in our council meeting. I've also asked the technical team to post that packet in the chat feature. That they're doing so now, and we will be displaying the amendments on the screen for the viewing public. The entire packet will be added to the file in LIMS once this meeting is adjourned. We will address each amendment in order. When we've completed action on all of the prepared amendments, I will open the floor to any further proposals that were maybe not done in time to be included in the packet. When we've completed all of those, we will then direct staff to revise the 2020 revised budget proposal to reflect these changes and to have that posted in advance of our public hearing, which is scheduled for next Wednesday, July 22nd at 10 a.m. Following the public hearing next Wednesday, we'll have one last opportunity to bring forward and consider any final amendments. Then the entire proposal will be submitted to the adjourned.
Horrible. I have a plumber right in town.
The entire proposal will be submitted to the adjourned meeting of the full City Council next Friday, 1 week from today, on July 24th, at which time we anticipate a final vote. Do any of my colleagues have questions or comments about the process that we've outlined? Any questions? All right, with that, I will ask Director Intramural if he would be willing to start through our packet and introduce each amendment. He can identify it, kind of read it through for professional public process, and then I will recognize that author immediately for comments. We will then open the floor for discussion on the amendment, and we have lots of people joining us today from each department that if there are questions, and I have asked that they be available to weigh in. If there is a departmental question where we can't find somebody immediately or they've just jumped into the conversation, I may ask that we put it aside temporarily and come back to it later in the sequence. We'll also ask our technical team to be sure that we're displaying each amendment as Mr. Intramural is explaining it so that the public can see what's being proposed. With that, I recognize you, Mr. Intramural, to introduce the first amendment.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, members of the committee, Micah Intramural, City Budget Director. Amendment number 1 is a motion by Councilmember Gordon, and it reads, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the Health and City Coordinator Department, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the Health Department by $50,000 one time for the fast track change item, reducing the appropriation in the City Coordinator Department by $50,000 one time. This reduction shall come from funds allocated for the Downtown Council Partnership.
Thank you, Mr. Intramural. Councilmember Gordon, did you want to speak to this amendment?
I did. I'd actually like to speak to this one and the next 2. So as my colleagues are aware, I'll be bringing forward 5 amendments today. The first 3 are to kind of backfill cuts that were proposed by the mayor with some programs, and we actually spoke about these at our last meeting. The first one is this fast track program, and the second one I believe is about the healthy homes for low-income people, and the third one is about the youth workers in Cedar Riverside and Seward. I was going to use as a funding source, as this articulates, the Downtown Council Partnership. I shared this idea with some of my colleagues and they had concerns about it, so I would like to bring in a different version of these first 3 where the funds are coming from the Minneapolis Police Department. I think you should be able to see that amendment in potentially
Council member, if I can jump in
the chat.
Tracy, we've posted the revised amendments into the chat, and the technical team will have the updated revised copy of your motion displayed momentarily.
Thank you. So just to reiterate that, colleagues, what is in this packet that you received and have before you today is different than the amendment before you, and it will soon be displayed on the screen. Is that also your understanding, Councilmember Gordon?
Well, I'm not exactly sure where everything is, but I would like to move my 3 substitutes for the first 3 items that would in effect change the funding source from the Downtown Council to the Minneapolis Police Department.
It looks like they're working to get your, there we go. Councilmember Gordon, is what you see on the screen accurate to your intentions right now for the first motion?
Correct. Well done, clerks. And I would have printed it myself and passed it out to all of you, but you're also far away. I couldn't seem to figure out where you were.
All right. Let's see. I will start with my colleagues. Are there any questions from other council members to this substitute motion by Councilmember Gordon? Not seeing anybody immediately in the chat, I will put myself into queue and just ask. I'm not comfortable with just saying blanket cuts to a department without saying where. Has there been any discussion as to where this money should come from within the police department? We have further amendments to the police department that are very specific as to what funding bucket they are coming from. And I do ask that as a general discipline from my colleagues. And I invite Director Intramural to add any additional information he might have about it.
And I can now also comment that there was, I was interested in taking it from a special operations fund. I was also trying to find a place where it would not necessarily impact the ability of police to respond to 911 calls, for example. But in some correspondence with the police department finance division, they seemed more comfortable with keeping it general and they could have some flexibility later. I would be open to ideas about making it more specific from my colleagues today. And also between now, assuming this passes, we could always refine the amendment at our next meeting.
Sorry, I'm just realizing that there were more messages down that I hadn't seen. Council President Bender, did you want to add anything here at this moment?
Nope, you asked my question as well, and I think, I guess I could just add that I think the reason for that practice is that it allows us to give direction for how to prioritize those cuts within a department rather than leaving that up to the department, to ensure that they're in line with the direction we're trying to give and the priorities of the body.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had similar concerns and just really wanting to know what area in the police budget that we were thinking of reducing these funds. Though generally I'm in support.
Thank you. I do want to clarify, I may have said substitutes. These are amendments. They've been revised. They were revised here at the very last minute, which is why they're not here in our ordered packets in front of us. Councilmember Gordon, did you want to help me understand more about the Special Operations Fund that you are thinking of here, that you said you might want to specify? And then if you don't want to, after that, I'm going to ask our budget director to chime in.
Yeah, you could turn to the budget director if you want. It looked like that was a source that had quite a bit of funding that hadn't been utilized yet and was unlikely to be utilized. And so that's why I went to it. I don't have it in front of me on my computer what the total was. Perhaps the budget director does. I'll see if I can find it.
Thank you, Director Intramural, and then Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think unless I am misremembering, the other amendments have all been written to at least specify the budget program area to be reduced, and in many cases are more specific in that. And to the points you've made, to the points the Council President has made, that's a discipline that we've tried to follow over the last few years to ensure alignment between departments and their deployment of resources and policymakers and their intent for resources. I think beyond that, there's another concern right now. So it's very easy to, because this feels like, aside from the fact that we're all broadcasting from our homes, this feels like a normal budget markup, but it is far from that. What we are doing right now is plugging holes in the structure as we're going, and that is extremely hard to do, and that is why more specificity is even more important now. And so I think that at a bare minimum, the finance department would strongly recommend at least including a budget program area. I would also offer, as I have to the author offline, it may be best to hold this item until next week so that specificity can be figured out.
Thank you for that detail. I think that's important, and that would be my intention as well. Councilmember Cunningham and then Kano.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you to Councilmember Gordon for bringing forward these amendments. These are really critical line items that I was very disappointed to see were included with the cuts. I know we have to make some hard decisions, but priorities, I feel like these better align with our priorities and values. While I appreciate good discipline and policies and practices, I guess one of the questions that I would have that has always been kind of a bit of a struggle for me is that we as a council, we get really specific. We say it comes from this particular program, or we're cutting this particular position from the department, and then department heads have the ability to then backfill or move money around however they would like to. So sure, we can signal this is what our priority is. We can say through being super specific that here's our values that we would like for you to reflect, but ultimately department heads have the ability to move money from wherever they would like to be able to backfill. So I appreciate the discipline, but I also want to just be clear from at least my understanding of the many conversations that I've had about this, that this is not about the city council directly telling this is not we are taking this because that's not a priority and you are not allowed to do that. They are still allowed to be able to move the money over and to be able to backfill it. So I appreciate this motion, but I just want to be able to name that because I think that that's a little bit of an unfair classification to say that we're specific because we want to give direction to department heads who have the ability to move money however they would like to anyway. So thank you.
Councilmember Kano took herself out of queue. Councilmember Gordon.
You know, I would have some openness into waiting, but I also think it would be useful for us if we support this to pass it. I really can relate to what Councilmember Cunningham is saying as well. A lot of times in the police department, we put money into some project and it ends up not going there because they've decided to move it to another one. So in light of that comment, and also in light of the fact that the department finance was comfortable and thought this was a good approach to take right now, I'm happy with it, but I'm also willing between now and our next meeting to refine it a little better if that would make folks comfortable. If others would prefer to table the whole idea, you could speak up and that would give me some guidance, but I think there's a lot of support for this and the next two items, and we may as well clarify that we want to fund them from the police department, and then we can dig into it a little more deeply later, and I can carry your message back to the department and say, please help me drill down and find a suitable location for this funding. We'd all be more comfortable with it.
I'm going to ask the budget director to respond because I'm a little uncomfortable with that characterization of how our budget office made suggestions about these changes.
I
Mr.
was talking about our budget office. I think you misunderstood me.
I think you were mentioning
our
the
budget
police finance.
With the police department, and their finance individual happens to be sick right now, and so that might have been other ramifications. And you all know that this was the last minute. I'm not trying to cast any dispersions on anyone. The staff has been very helpful, and if you want to have any anger aimed at anyone, aim it at me. This is my work product.
I'm not acting out of anger at all right now, but I just would like our budget director to weigh in on this, absent our very sick person in police finance right now. Mr. Intramural?
I hope that budgets are never angry times for any of us. So just to be very clear, my comments are wholly with respect to source and the specificity, and have nothing to do with weighing in on the merits or demerits of the item in whole. I think just to respond to Councilmember Cunningham, it's true that the City Council appropriates money at the fund and department level. The City Council also takes great care, as does the mayor, in proposing a budget, in articulating direction for how those dollars are going to be spent. And that's done through our 600+ page budget document. I think there's a social contract at play, and that is, departments read that budget book, they take that direction, and yes, they do have the authority to deviate from it if they see fit, and if changing conditions necessitate it. But that social contract says they really do need to stay in alignment with the direction that council's given, or that the council can redirect it, because the council has the power of the purse. They have the authority to appropriate the dollars, and they have the authority to approve or disapprove of a nomination of a department head if they were to totally throw out the direction that was given through the budget document. And so, again, I do point back to the initial comments I made, that particularly given that we are mid-year, I do recommend that we, at a minimum, include the budget program as a specific source for the $50,000 cut, either one or a combination of programs, and that we're specific with respect to how much would come from each if there are indeed multiple.
Thank you. Councilmember Fletcher?
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And I appreciate that explanation, and I think it's particularly clear given the pretty profound changes that we've seen announced in departmental allocations through the press without any consultation with council, which is fine. And we're clear about the way that the charter allocates the police department's reporting structure. It is just kind of clear that the stakes feel fairly low about picking the right program for this to come from, because it is very clear that Chief Arredondo has the power to reallocate funds. And so if Councilmember Gordon almost picked a program at random, or picked a program that he thought made sense, it feels like we could pass this and not be imperiling any financial process within the Minneapolis Police Department, beyond the cut that's proposed. So I do think that events on the ground certainly suggest that that getting it exactly right about exactly which program line we're coming from is not necessarily the most useful of exercises.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback. I do want to add in about the idea of discipline. This is not discipline for discipline's sake. The mayor, in his proposed revisions, has to be specific in his revisions to the budget, and I simply ask that we do the same when we're in this kind of a setup. This isn't like an annual budget process where a fairly small amount of money like this gets, can be spread out over a very long period of time. It makes me uncomfortable in a lot of ways. One of them being that there are further amendments coming forward after this, and I don't know how much time people have had a chance to look at that packet this morning. And evidently there's a lot of amendments, 2 more by Councilmember Gordon, that will change the funding pool for some of his proposed changes. And what is the total amount of money today that we're proposing to take out of the police department budget? I mean, that is an important consideration in how I would weigh something like this. It's nothing. I think my interest is very similar to all my colleagues in not wanting to see a fast track change item go away, but how we do this, I think, is really important. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion, and I do think that what my colleagues are saying is well taken and an accurate representation of how budgeting works. I think our finance department is trying to continue to better align department work with policymaker priorities. So in the feedback that we've received from Director Innermill, I take it as a sort of support for improving our financing and budget processes so that they are more transparent, more detailed, and more in alignment with policymaker priorities. So I think we do have a long way to go in achieving those goals, and even in particular, even in getting information about how departments are spending funds. So especially in the very large departments that have a lot of sort of very big buckets of funding. So as we move forward with economic uncertainty and likely need to cut in future budgets, I think that transparency and that level of detail is going to become more and more important. I mean, it should have always, we should have always had this information, in my opinion, but I appreciate the efforts of finance in working toward that transparency and that level of detail and that specificity from departments. So I think both things are true right now, and I think Dr. Innermill is trying to hold all of the departments to that standard. The reporting structures are different, as my colleagues have mentioned, and I certainly everything that council members have said about the current practices are accurate. So yeah, I just wanted to chime in with that observation about how both things are true.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Not seeing anybody else in queue, I would say that yes, our budget office does ask that we would, did suggest or recommend that we would wait on something like this to give it the same amount of specificity as other amendments. But Councilmember Gordon, this is your motion, not mine, and I will invite you to decide to wait on that change or whether you would like to take a roll call vote on this now.
I will move this forward, and everybody heard what I said already, and I'm willing and able to work on more details going forward, but I'd like to move this, and I'm happy to move the next 2 forward as well.
Okay, then if there's nothing further, we have this first amendment offered by Councilmember Gordon. It is the one in front of you. I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Madam Chair, can I clarify we're just voting on Amendment 1 at this point?
Yes.
Sounds good. Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham. Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
No. Thank you.
There are 11 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to the second amendment. I should ask Mr. Innermill, do you have the second amendment in front of you, the amended version of it to read, or should we ask Councilmember Gordon?
Madam Chair, I've got it.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, the second motion is by Councilmember Gordon reading, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the health and city coordinator departments. If I can make a change on the fly, if that's allowable for the clerk, I believe to make this conform with the edits down below, that should be for the health and police departments. Increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the health department by $25,000 one time for the healthy living and low income housing change item. Reducing the appropriation in the police department by $25,000 one time. Source unspecified.
Thank you. I'll call on the council member. Councilmember Gordon, if you have any initial comments.
Yes, and thank you very much for correcting that department. I think that we didn't strike that and add that new language in there. So this is actually revising the budget in the general fund for the health and police departments. And I will move this item forward for approval, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon has moved this item for approval. Are there any questions or comments from any of my colleagues? Seeing none, clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
No.
There are 11 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you. The next item is also from Councilmember Gordon. It is amendment number 3. It is different than the one in your packets. And I will turn to Director Intramural to read this and then Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. The third amendment is a motion by Councilmember Gordon, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the health and police departments, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the health department by $30,000 one time for the youth coordinating board, part-time youth workers in Cedar Riverside change item, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the police department by $30,000 one time. Madam Chair, if I may note, this the amendment that is in the packet does need some cleanup work. As it's written, the reduction to the police department does not specify the fund. I added it verbally in my reading.
Director Intramural, is it correct on the screen?
Madam Chair, no, it is not. The final sentence has the fund source stricken from it. So the final sentence should read, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the police department by $30,000 one time. And Madam Chair, in that I am making some assumptions about the author's intent, and so it would be good to confirm with him that my assumptions are correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Those assumptions are correct, and I'm sorry in the amendments as we were sending them through that we didn't get all the details correct.
So just to clarify, Councilmember Gordon, does this come from the same general, non-specifically designated part of the police department for the police department themselves to figure out?
Yeah, but we have to have the words in the general fund for the Minneapolis or for the police department. And
correct.
Mistakenly, and also in the first line, it has to clarify that it's revising the budgets for the health and Minneapolis police departments.
Got it.
And
Are there,
I'll move this forward for approval.
thank you. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues on this matter? I'm not seeing any. I will just add that, again, my interest is not in making a cut to this part-time youth workers in Cedar Riverside group, but my objection here is truly on our specificity and knowing what we are taking out is a different choice so that we can make any type of known or thoughtful decision here as to what the trade-offs are. So with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
No.
There are 11 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you. Amendment number 4. I will ask Director Intramural to introduce amendment number 4, which is another one from Councilmember Gordon. I think this is the one that is in people's meeting packets. Director?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The amendment number 4 is a motion by Councilmember Gordon, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for community planning and economic development, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the community planning and economic development department by $50,000 one time for the cooperative technical assistance program change item, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the community planning and economic development department by $50,000 one time. This reduction shall come from funds appropriated for executive administration.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Councilmember Gordon to help us understand some of the context and conversations that you've had around this.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I just want to notice how the great work I did in identifying an actual fund from the CPAD department. So this is coming from the Executive Administration Fund. There were a few funds in CPAD that seemed to be pretty substantial, and I conferred with the interim director and determined to take $50,000 from the Executive Administration Fund, which prior to this was at $1,467,000. And this will just be going back to follow through with a commitment we made in last year's budget to support the technical assistance program in the Economic Development Division for cooperative technical assistance. I know this was important to a lot of us, and now we can keep that going with this one-time transfer of funds within the department. I will move this forward for approval and certainly be open for any questions.
Thank you, Councilmember. I believe this is actually something we know of as is a different name. Is this actually the Africa Village one, not CTAP?
No, this is CTAP, Cooperative Technical Assistance Program. It potentially some services could have been provided from other entities. So this is our Business Technical Assistance Program where we help businesses on an individual basis moving forward. So it's part of the larger BTAP program that we call it, which is Business Technical Assistance Program. We also have a DTAP, which is Developer Technical Assistance Program for somebody who wants to be in the business of developing properties. So this is within the department, but some of the money does get transferred out through contracts. I don't think Village Trust ever got a contract, but I could be wrong.
Thank you. Just for clarification purposes, I'm going to ask the Director Intramural to jump in quickly, and then we'll go to other people in the meeting chat. Director?
Madam Chair, thank you. So this item is listed on pages 362 and 363 of the 2020 Council adopted budget book. And I'll just briefly read the proposal details. It says the Council approves $50,000 in one-time general funds to be deployed specifically in conjunction with a cooperative public market for the Africa Village project in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. And my memory from last year's markup is that this was originally a change item titled Africa Village, and after some discussion at the dais, I believe it was Councilmember Cano who recommended retitling it Cooperative Technical Assistance Program because the subject matter is very similar to services provided under that program in CPED.
Councilmember Gordon, does that change your understanding of this motion, or do you want to continue with this motion?
I will continue.
Okay, thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And after that information from Mr. Intermill, I'm even more confused. I thought I was going to speak in support of this because the Cooperative Technical Assistance Program, which does help businesses, but also helps communities to develop co-ops, which I think is going to be integral part of our recovery strategy moving forward. But if this is titled something different than what the intended use is, I need more understanding of, is this for Africa Village or is this for the CTAP program that currently exists? I'm not clear.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need that clarification from the author. What is your intent, Council Member?
This was for the CTAP program, generally speaking. Perhaps we might want to, if it seems like by having the word change item in there, we've created a problem. I will move to table this item till our next meeting.
Okay, so you're going to withdraw your initial motion and instead, or rather, I might need some help from the clerk here. I think let me just kind of level set. I think there's a lot of concerns about this. One is the intention of refilling it, and the other is the source that we didn't get to. But in these last minute changes, in my understanding from the interim CPED director, is that this would be a change that would result in staff layoffs and furloughs. These are the impacts when we say general reductions from departments that the interim CPED director had an opportunity to think through and consider, and that is where she said it would be coming from. So at this point in time, I'm just going to go with what the author said to table this, and then council member, is your intent to table it and to do some additional work on it and maybe bring it back next week? Yeah, and if I don't have to take a vote on withdrawing it, I could withdraw it to do that work now. I was not privy to any discussions that mentioned any kind of layoffs. I'm going to ask Mr. Daler to weigh in on that. Do we need to take a vote to table this, or with the author's intentions, can we just remove it?
Yeah, Councilmember Gordon, Madam Chair, Councilmember Gordon can just withdraw his motion, and there's no need for a vote on that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Let's withdraw that one for now and go to Councilmember Gordon's amendment number 5. Is this, Councilmember Gordon, the same one that we have in our packets?
Yes, it is. This is the same one. It's amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the General Fund for Community Planning and Economic Development, increasing the appropriation in the General Fund for the department by $75,000, one time for the payday lending change item and reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the Community Planning and Economic Development Department by $75,000 one time. This reduction shall come from funds appropriated for the Director of Housing and Policy Development. I can speak to that briefly if you'd like.
Yeah, so we typically we've had the budget director read them and then the author speak to them. So I'm just going to consider that we've read it out loud and go ahead now and speak with it.
Yes, I feel like you've been so generous with my 5 motions and appreciate that, my colleagues. And this is my last one. Yeah, and this was another funding source that was helped me get to, working with finance and the interim director. This would be coming from the director's fund, which prior to this had $3,893,000 left in it. I did not hear anything back about how this would necessitate any kind of layoffs. Happy to take any questions, and I'll move this forward for approval.
Thank you. I would like to ask Eric Hansen to weigh in, our city staff, and then Interim Director Brennan can speak to the source of the funds if needed. But Mr. Hansen, is there a way for you to jump in here? I believe he's on the call.
Madam Chair, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm Eric Hansen. I'm the Director of Economic Policy and Development. And the motion in front of you is for a pilot program to refinance high-risk loans, individual high-risk loans that have come out, originated from what we call payday lending, which is pledging your future income for high-interest cash today. We've worked with Councilmember Gordon earlier this year about issuing an RFP sometime in the future. We've held off on issuing that RFP because of the budget situation. So the idea would be to bring in a community-based lender, and this funding would allow for refinancing of those loans. This is the kind of seed capital for a revolving loan fund.
Thank you. Yes, but then could I ask Andrea Brennan to please speak to the source of the trade-off here as to what we will look to backfill it? Director Brennan?
Hi, yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I'm Andrea Brennan, Interim CPAD Director. The Director of Housing Policy and Development budget includes, it's a very large budget item. I think the total is over $3 million. However, it does include the $3 million for stable homes, stable schools, includes funding that is dedicated to contracts for homeless response. So the only discretionary funds in that budget is for staff costs, the same as the previous item. So to the extent there could be savings from vacancies, there may be some ability to absorb this, but if the only discretionary, well, it's non-discretionary, it's staffing costs. So it would just, it could have impacts throughout in other areas of the department related to the need to reduce staffing costs in other areas, to the extent that these two budgets do not have sufficient funds to absorb this cut.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from my colleagues? I will say that we've had a lot of discussion in the initial conversations with the mayor and council president and council vice president and I about the strategy here, and to balance the need to be strategic about things that will be longer term kinds of austere budgets ahead, with doing things like laying off staff because we would need to make up that much money in just 5 short months of the year, or what furloughs would accomplish in something like this. So I just want to make it clear that this would be offset by staffing costs that might be different than the author's intention here, as you said at the beginning of this. But I will ask if the author or anybody else wants to speak on this before I ask the clerk to call the roll. Seeing none, I will ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
No.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Palmisano.
No.
There are 10 ayes and 2 nays.
Thank you. That amendment is adopted. Next, we will move on to 2 amendments proposed by the council president. I'm going to ask Director Intermill to read the motion and then ask the author to speak to it. Director Intermill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment number 6 is a motion by Council President Bender. Staff in community planning and economic development and finance are directed to work proactively with nonprofit and community partners to identify and respond to opportunities to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, or NOAA, to support the long-term housing stability of city residents. In the event that NOAA preservation funding in the city's budget is insufficient to respond to opportunities to preserve NOAA, staff are directed to identify potential funds that may be reallocated for this purpose for consideration by the City Council.
Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to the council president to add some thoughts about this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll note, actually, I just sent an amendment, a small change to my second number 7 item, which is in everyone's inbox. So that was a little delay just now. So, I think this staff direction essentially in the budget process reflects our shared understanding of strategies around housing preservation, but I did just want to speak to it and why I think it is meaningful that we take this action. So I think all of you know, but for the public and others, for the last number of years, we've been pursuing the strategy of preserving naturally occurring affordable housing. So those are the housing options in our community that are already affordable for folks at certain levels of income. And it's a challenging strategy in part because we're relying on our ability as a government to compete in the market with for-profit buyers. But it is also a very effective strategy and a good way to use dollars, because often the cost per unit of these affordable housing, naturally occurring affordable units is a really good deal for us and for the people that we're working to serve. And so I just wanted to be clear that the direction from the council, and I've talked with the mayor's office about this as well, is that we do still support using staff time to pursue NOAA preservation projects. And if there is a project that exceeds the amount that's left in the budget for this by the end of the year, that we would still want staff to use that staff time and to bring that forward to us so that we can make a decision about adjusting our budget in order to take advantage of those opportunities. And partly I want to do this just to honor that we've asked our staff to do a lot of different things, and particularly in the housing group. And so I don't think it is a small thing to ask the staff to continue to prioritize this work, but just wanted to be clear that it is a priority for the council, and to acknowledge that there's an unpredictability to when the funds may be needed. So thanks for everyone who's worked on this for a number of years, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to echo what Council President Bender said, but also note that Within the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, we also prioritize stabilization. And even though we call it stabilization, it's essentially NOAA. It is basically taking buildings that potentially could be marked up to market rate and or buildings that are for sale and working with our nonprofit and for-profit partners to stabilize them. And that is naturally occurring affordable housing. So I think we do actually address this in multiple places within the city. It's just called something different. And so I think it is important that we note that stabilization and preserving naturally occurring affordable housing are essentially the same thing. I think the difference would be new construction versus stabilizing existing construction. And I see the council president shaking her head because she knows that to be true. And we can use Affordable Housing Trust Fund money also on a per unit basis to stabilize affordable housing in the city, which is also naturally occurring affordable. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Thank you. I just want to echo the comments of the council president and Councilmember Goodman. I want to thank the council president for bringing this forward. It's actually critical that this comes forward now. One thing that's happening is the governor's moratorium on rent and mortgages is still being upheld, but rent and mortgages are eventually going to become due, and the ones that are most vulnerable are going to be these NOAA developments. So I think it's really important that we're proactive and devoting staff time and resources to this.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anybody else that wants to weigh in on this. I will thank the council president for this amendment, and I'll ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
I'm sending it.
Councilmember Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
Thank you. That amendment is adopted. Next, we have Council President Bender's second amendment. She did just mention that she made some brief, small changes in it, and that they are in our emails. It doesn't look like, oh, I just had it wrong. Looks like we've all seen it. Does the budget director have this one, Council President? If so, I'm going to just have him read it for consistency's sake.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, I do have it in front of me.
Great, then I'll ask him to go ahead and read it, and I'll let everyone know it's in their inbox. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, amendment number 7 is a motion by Council President Bender amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the fire, health, and city coordinator departments, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the fire department by $62,250 one time for training and education, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the health department by $7,750 one time for solar green energy and youth development in the environmental health unit, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the sustainability unit in the city coordinator department by $70,000 one time. This reduction shall come from funds allocated for home energy squad visits, which cannot be performed at the previously planned rate due to complications of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Thank you. I'm going to call on the council president just because I see the one that was in our packet, and as you mentioned, it is a substantive difference, and I'm just a little bit confused here on the fly as to what that difference is, and if you could help us explain it. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So I asked through the clerk's office all departments to send us a summary of the cuts that they made as a result of the 15% contractual cut across the board that we made during phase 1 of the cuts. And I want to say that they were very detailed and very thoughtful, and I really appreciate the staff time that went into them. So thank you to all the staff that participated in that. As Council Vice President Jenkins reminds us, everything that the city does should be done from the lens of race equity. And so when we made these 15% across the board cuts, it was important to ask these questions of how are these cuts affecting our race equity commitments, and ask each department to, within those cuts they were asked to make, to prioritize race equity. And so I've gone through and read them all. I would encourage everyone to do so as well. And there were a couple of things that I still need to follow up on with some of the department staff that were not ready for today, but this one, with apologies for the very last minute item that I just changed. So this would be using a source of funds that, unfortunately, because of the COVID pandemic, we are not able to spend on a priority for the city, which is supporting sustainability through home energy audits. But those funds will not be spent on that use. So we are able to use those funds to backfill a couple of the cuts that were made from that 15% reduction. And some of our departments have more discretionary spending and more contractual spending than others. So these go to programs in the fire and health department. The health department's programs were actually based on the fire department's programs. And so they're really in sync with each other, and I've communicated with health department and with Chief Friedel about them, as well as finance and the coordinator's office. So the fire department program is a career pathway program that has served to diversify our fire department and to do some planning, because so many of the calls that our fire department receives are health calls. So it's really investing in that expertise specific to emergency medical services. And then the other item, the smaller one in the health department, is for 2 programs that are specific to jobs training and youth development, but they're also from a lens of a green jobs perspective. So those are the cuts the shifts. I'm happy to answer any questions about them, and thanks to all the staff that, again, who did all of that work to look through the 15% cuts, and for those who helped prepare this change.
Thank you, and thank you for your specificity and the context around this amendment. Are there any questions or comments from my other colleagues on this one? I'm not seeing any. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon.
Aye.
Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison. Councilmember Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman.
Aye.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Kano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Chair Palmisano.
Aye.
There are 12 ayes.
Thank you. This amendment is adopted. Next, we will move on to Councilmember Kano's amendments. We'll start with amendment number 8, and I believe Councilmember Kano, correct me if I'm wrong, this is the same as the one that are in everybody's agenda packets that are in front of them. Is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Director Intramural to read the motion, and then I'll ask the author to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Amendment number 8 is a motion by Councilmember Kano, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the Health and City Coordinator departments, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the Health Department by $60,000 one time for the Office of Violence Prevention to support citywide safety beyond.
Director, you accidentally hit the mute button.
Increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the Health Department by $60,000 one time for the Office of Violence Prevention to support citywide safety beyond policing strategies that meet our city's racial equity goals. Reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the City Coordinator Department on a one-time basis by $60,000. This reduction shall come from monies previously budgeted for CAJUG.
Thank you. Councilmember Kano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the intent of this motion is basically to align all of the work that we're trying to do around safety and reducing some of the crime that we're seeing in our communities and empowering those grassroots efforts to really be supported and have that systems-wide implementation that residents are now asking for. So really, this is a sort of a neutral, I guess, budget move. It's not really causing a hole anywhere per se. We're simply aligning the resources under its proper home, which would be the Office of Violence Prevention, and allowing the experts under that umbrella to really operationalize these funds in a way that meet our city's racial equity goals that are now, hopefully impacting our city, and specifically, some of the cultural communities that we know are being hit the hardest by this transition in our current policing system. So I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano has moved this amendment. Councilmember Goodman.
Thanks. Councilmember Cano, does this take money away from Kajug though? I mean, it's budget neutral in that is it still giving them the money, but having it out of the Office of Violence Prevention? Because it might not be seen as budget neutral to them. So I'm just wondering if you talked to anyone at Kajug or if we're actually reducing their budget by $60,000.
Councilmember Cano?
We might be.
I'm going to ask the budget director what his understanding is, because that's, of course, where the money gets drawn from. It is coming through the budget office. Director Intramural, is it true that if to put this toward the intended function, as Councilmember Cano describes it, would there be any monies left for Kajug?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My understanding is that these are the only monies budgeted in the city for Kajug. Originally, the amount was $80,000. In the mayor's revised recommendation, he recommends reducing that by $20,000, and this would be the remaining $60,000 available for Kajug. I would defer to the city coordinator as these funds flow through his department, if he would have any additional context.
Thank you. I would like the city coordinator Ruff, if you are on the call, to maybe weigh in on this a little bit, just to clear up any misunderstandings.
Madam Chair, members of the Council, Mark Ruff, City Coordinator. I don't know that I can clear up any more. I think if there are specific questions, we'd be better off responding to those specific questions at a later date, just because this is still a newer program for the coordinator's office, and just with the COVID-19 has had some impact on this particular contract as well.
Thank you. I'm going to call on Councilmember Cunningham and ask if you'd also share what you had shared in the chat with us too.
Yes, so thank you, Madam Chair. So what I said in the chat is if it were to go to the Office of Violence Prevention, it would likely be folded into the Office of the Violence Prevention Fund that has an RFP process in which you could participate in. But that is my assumption based on the infrastructure of the Office of Violence Prevention and money being folded into it. So, because from the way that I'm reading it, it's not like the contract would directly go from a direct contract to a direct contract just under the Office of Violence Prevention. So I actually wanted to be able to get clarification from Councilmember Cano around it. Are we looking to do a direct appropriation still to Kajug, or is the idea that that this money would be allocated into the Office of Violence Prevention Fund that then Kajug could apply for, like everyone all the other organizations who are seeking funds from that pot of money. So if I can just get some clarification about what the intention is once it lives in the Office of Violence Prevention, that would be helpful.
Correct. It's in line with what you just mentioned, Councilmember Cunningham, and it's in line with what many other council members have stated earlier in this meeting, is that the notion is to be able to rectify an action that we took earlier where there was no transparency and how a specific group was selected for a budget allocation. There was no RFP process, there was no metrics or goals assigned to it, and it was placed in a department that I think doesn't have the expertise to manage a grant like this. The Office of Violence Prevention does. So I think it is to bring transparency to our process of how we award funds, how we keep track of them, how we support those grantees to deliver on results and on goals. So it would be exactly what Councilmember Cunningham just mentioned, where the Office of Violence Prevention would then use these resources to open up an RFP along with the other work that they're already doing. So it's not like they would have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, but it is to integrate it into that broader body of work that we already know is very professionalized, very successful, has communications techniques to get different groups to come forward. And so in fact, we could see multiple groups from the East African community applying and getting resources, not just handpicking our favorite political allies to get resources.
Councilmember Cunningham, you wanted to follow up.
Yes, thank you. So this cut is the reason why I have a bit of a concern around this cut is that the clients and those who benefit from CAJUG are not at fault for whatever political maneuvering had happened. And this is cutting into their annual budget for this year. So that is a bit of a concern that I have, because also our Office of Violence Prevention Fund has all that money has already been allocated. That program has already been completed for this year. And the money that's going out now is in response to the increase in violence. And so I guess I just have concerns that we're moving the money, and I understand and I agree. I just want to be clear, like that this money has there was a lack of transparency. I spoke of the issue as well last year when this issue was brought up. My concern around it. I guess I just I have concerns of hurting an organization and the folks that they serve because of the fact that there was political maneuvering that happened by leaders, and this is cutting into their budget for this year. If we were moving forward as of like the 2021 budget, that I would feel a little bit more comfortable with that. But I think I would. I just have concerns with causing unintended harm to the Cedar Riverside community as a result of this, and not having a council member for that ward makes it a little bit more challenging to be able to understand the nuance of the immediate consequences of moving these dollars. So thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I would just express my concerns too, in that, you know, the intent of the Office of Violence Prevention is to help organizations that are on the ground working with marginalized communities to create crime prevention and safety in our communities. The work of CAJUG has been doing that for many years. So the goal of this grant is absolutely in line with the Office of Violence Prevention. It really seems unfair to me to have to now for them to have to go into a pool which would only consist of the funds that had been allocated to them, and put that into a competitive process with other groups that, albeit are very much needed and needy for these resources, but yeah, I'm not sure if I can support this today.
Yeah, so I have been off on the side here asking what staff I could call on right now to speak to some of these other questions in the chat, which are summarized in terms of where Kajuga is based out of. There are other parts of our city with sizable East African communities that don't feel served by this, and I don't know. This original appropriation was $80,000, and I don't know if the reason why this amendment is 60 is because that first $20,000 was used, or if there are like invoices coming for reimbursement for existing work. I might ask if the author wants to, at this point in time, table this for now and bring it back next week with more information from the coordinator's office, or if you would like to proceed with this now and see if there's support for your motion as is.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So since the city coordinator is here, I'd be curious to hear, so how much of the grant has already been issued or encumbered? And what are the goals that have been produced from the resources that have already been distributed?
I should mention that was another question. I believe our city coordinator had said he'd have to get back to us on those details, but Mr. Ruff, are you there and could you just clarify?
Sure. Madam Chair, Councilmember Cano, as of this time, we have been in conversations with the organization because we knew there would be budget adjustments. We put them on notice that their program could be subject to some of these adjustments, just as we did for all other organizations that were in similar circumstances. You know, it is fair summary to say that they are expecting money, but at this point in time, we haven't obligated any money. And so technically, do we owe them funds at this point in time? According to a contractual agreement, no. But is there an expectation that has been described previously? Yes, I would say there is an expectation. They are based out of Cedar Riverside, to answer Councilmember Cano's question in the chat as well.
Thank you for that clarification. So just to be sure then, so the funding was there, but it hasn't been issued and a contract hasn't been signed, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. I mean, I understand what some folks are saying regarding let's not do harm, but I don't think that we're helping by protecting or rewarding government's bad behavior on this. I mean, we messed up, and I think we have to rectify that. And I guess, like, I just feel really strongly about having some transparency, fairness, and justice in this particular budget allocation. Otherwise, I wouldn't bring it up. I don't see the rest of us doing this kind of thing, and we don't do it for a reason. So I think it's important for us to like learn our lesson, but also to like rectify the record and not allow government to make mistakes like this. I think it's a bad precedent. I think it opens up patterns for more people to do that, and I wouldn't like us to do that. I wouldn't just handpick my favorite organization in my ward and give them money. Most of the time people get mad at me because I don't do that, because everything has to be put forward through an RFP process where healthy organizations have to make their case of how they want to serve people and how they're grounded in that work and how that collectively that work is consented to by a community and a base. So I would like to move forward with this amendment. I understand that folks might have additional concerns above and beyond what's being presented here. But I think we're actually doing right by Cedar Riverside to rectify this record and to say, hey, we're going to put this money in the right house. We're going to put this money in a clear process that many groups can have a chance at, instead of again doing sort of this, closed door deals with specific groups where we promise them money, and it feels wrong, and I don't think it's right. And I think we need to be able to feel that our actions are ethical and responsible and transparent, and I don't think that they were, and I think that it's important to be able to align those resources under the professionalism of an enterprise that's responsible to serving multiple constituencies and multiple groups, not just one. So I don't think we're doing harm for a specific group. I think we're actually helping empower a much broader community around how do you submit a proposal, how do you make the case, how do you talk about metrics and goals and outcomes, and how do you build a base, and how can you be held responsible to those specific tax dollars? Because these are people's tax dollars, and I'm sure that there's a lot of folks who don't agree with what happened. And they're not here today to lobby us, and they're, we're obviously in COVID times. So I would say that we should look at the bigger picture here, that it's not just one specific group, but it's a pattern of processes and decisions that I think the city should be held responsible for and rectify. And I think that putting this money in the Office of Violence Prevention is exactly where it should have been from the get-go. It's exactly where it should be managed and overseen. I don't think our city coordinator's office has the capacity to oversee a grant like this, specifically around issues that relate to crime and safety and Somali youth and Cedar Riverside. And like I said, I met with a lot of Somali moms that are not part of Kajug, that were doing their own grassroots organizing in Cedar Riverside because their own council member wouldn't meet with them. And it would be great to see some of them share in the resources through a transparent and open and public process. So I think this is actually a good move, and I don't think we should let ourselves get carried away with the notion that somehow rectifying the record misses out on the mark. I think we're actually opening up the mark, opening up the conversation, and letting more people in the door instead of shutting the door. So with that, I'm happy to call for a vote.
Would you allow me to add in one last comment from the council president, who was in queue a little bit earlier?
Sure. Yep, I didn't.
And then we will. And then I do want to acknowledge that just in the last 5 minutes, there's been an email into all council members from the from the mayor, who's attaching some information from the head of Kajug, I believe. I haven't had a chance to read it, but let me see if that is at all useful in this conversation. But I understand your intent is to do a roll call vote today. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm pretty torn on this, and I imagine others feel the same way. I completely agree with everything Councilmember Kano has said about transparency, about I agree that this funding fits within the Office of Violence Prevention. I agree, I think, with the fact that resting it there would help us as an enterprise be strategic about youth support and violence prevention in the Cedar Riverside area, which I know is a priority for the Office of Violence Prevention. I'm cognizant that it's we're in the summertime where these violence prevention dollars are often really needed more than other seasons of the year. And so, I think with the information that I have right now, I'm not sure I can support this because I don't know exactly how ready OVP would be to distribute or spend these funds. And I feel like I need more information from the Office of Violence Prevention about their approach to the Cedar Riverside area and how that would all work. But I do agree 100% with the intention of this amendment, and likely could support it with just a little bit more information. So.
Thank you. I'll call on the author, Councilmember Cano, again, and then I will yield the floor to the mayor briefly. Councilmember Cano.
Yeah, I think that it would be helpful to get more time on this, because it is really important that we clean this up. And so, you know, typically grants that deal with crime and safety and supporting youth would not be issued this late into the year. This is already almost like summer coming to a close. So I do have questions about whether or not the city coordinator's office would be able to issue the resources now, and what that contract and those metrics and those outcomes would result in, or how they would be codified and who's codifying them, because the budget allocation that we voted on in the last cycle was pretty unclear. So I think what I'd like to do now is wait on this motion and get more information from the city coordinator's office, get clarity on the intent of the services and where those are codified, and who has come up with those, I guess, with that body of work, and find a way to get these resources under the right home, to resource more than just one group in a way that feels transparent and inclusive. So I think I'm leaning more towards how can we share the resources through a process, versus promising one group money and then taking votes on it later, and then awarding our political allies. I think that looks really, really bad for the city, and I'm really sorry that it got approved last time. So I'd like to just take some time to look into this a little bit more with staff and talk to a few other colleagues, because I think that many of us recognize the conundrum we're in, and I don't want us to be shamed out of acknowledging that responsibility. So I'd like to just see if we can get to a good place where this doesn't feel like we're shutting the door on one specific group, but that we're also acknowledging that we can't govern that way. We can't just pick our favorite groups and give them money without a public process, without an RFP that's competitive, without a clear contract that details a body of work that needs to be done, and that it belongs in a department that has that expertise and that background. So I'm sorry that this took up so much time, but I'd be happy to move this out of the queue and tackle the next amendment.
Councilmember Cano, thank you, and thank you for your willingness to do some of this extra work. I did then ask the mayor if his office would just work with you instead of needing to speak today on this motion. And perhaps you'll be ready to bring something back with a little bit more specificity on this one, even as early as next week. Thank you. So we will consider item number 8 withdrawn for now. And we will move on to motion number 9, which Councilmember Cano has emailed us all changes. It's not the one that is in your packet, and I'll ask the budget director to read it, and then the council member to speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, amendment number 9 is a motion by Councilmember Cano, amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the city coordinator and police departments, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the city coordinator's office by $150,000 one time for the Creative City Challenge change item, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the police department on a one-time basis by $150,000.
Thank you. Now I'm going to ask the author to speak to this a little bit and give us some context. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had emailed you some background information on this, and happy to elaborate and also to consider any amended language to this if it helps to make it more clear or specific. So the notion is to allocate $150,000 one time for the city coordinator's Creative City Challenge program, and to reduce the police department by this $150,000 allocation. Specifically, it is to support hiring teams of artists across our city to be able to help us design and implement a framework and process for recovery efforts that have specifically impacted areas where we know the civil unrest was pretty intense. So 38th and Chicago is one potential site. The 3rd precinct, where the 3rd precinct burned down, and now we have a lot of different stakeholders asking what's going to happen here, who gets to say what happens here, how do we participate. And so the city in general does have a pretty good track record of hiring artists or teams of artists to lead us in either really complex work like the comp plan, or have helped us to embed artists throughout our city departments to be able to weave in community engagement processes and more racial equity outcomes. And so I would be happy to add more of that language here if that's helpful, because as I'm reading it now, I realize that a lot of the context that I had shared via email didn't make it into the actual language here. And some folks may not know what the Creative City Challenge program is, but we can also tweak that program to fit our current reality, which is much different than where we were a year ago. So that's basically the intent, and I did share also a tentative high-level sketch of how that money could be programmed and packaged, and that was a sketch that our city staff put together based on conversations about potentially what this work could do. So I'll stand for questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano, I'll start with asking about your source, because I'm actually very familiar with the Creative City Challenge program, but I am troubled again by this source of having a blanket reduction in the police department without any specificity as to where it would come from. So if you could help me understand the source and maybe some of your conversations with MPD on this decision for source, because it has changed from earlier versions, and then I will call on someone from the police department. Thank you.
You're welcome. The source is the police department in general. I think that based on earlier conversations with colleagues today, it seems like that is an approach that is empowering of the police department to choose where those resources could come from. It's been a bit challenging to get some information from MPD to more clearly identify constructive sources of changing the money around. So I think that if we do present this cut, just like the other ones previous to this one were presented, we're allowing the chief and his leadership team to figure out where the best place is for these cuts to live.
Thank you. I'm honestly worried that it's not empowering at all. I'd want to remind my colleagues that 80% of the MPD's budget is staff. It just doesn't sound responsible and transparent and all of the things that I know you were just saying to do these kinds of blanket cuts. And I want to call on Chief Arredondo just to get his sense of, or from an MPD perspective, where is your sense as to where a number of these blanket cuts, and the next one is also a general appropriation cut to MPD, where will they come from? Chief Arredondo?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you, Councilmember Cano, for your remarks. Yes, so, and I also just want to say too, I know that Director McPherson could not be on the phone here, who does all of our detailed overall budget work for us, but I would say that whatever information I certainly can get from our elected officials as to ideas or specifics as to where within the budget they're envisioning their proposed amendments would come from. I think it'd be helpful as I look to shape this very dramatic, and I want to stress I understand and respect the enormous responsibility our electeds have here as they try to shape our city's 2020 budget amidst a pandemic. We certainly are experiencing a significant increase in violent crime and the other things that are impacting our city. But from a chief's perspective, a department head's perspective, the more that I can get some specifics as to where within the MPD budget, as Commissano mentioned, the vast majority of that 80% or plus is wages and salaries, it would better help me to design and prepare and to make sure that the budget is in alignment with what the council's overall is for the city. But my concern is that if we don't have a whole lot of specifics and based on the timelines that our council is having to prepare this budget, it could potentially be problematic. And so I just want to do everything that I can as a department head to try to help in this process. So thank you.
Thank you. I open this back up to Council Vice President Jenkins for comments, whether about the source or the Creative City Challenge item. Council Vice President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I would just, generally I'm supportive of the idea of using artists to help us to really figure out a process to respond to rebuilding the areas that Councilmember Cano mentioned. I really think having artists involved in that process is important. I do know that the Community Planning and Economic Development just received a $50,000 grant to do community engagement around that, potentially using artists. And I thought that the coordinator's office had indicated that that they were able to fund the activities of the Creative City Challenge. And I could very well be mistaken, but if Mr. Ruff wants to address that at all, I would appreciate it. But it was my understanding that those funds could be absorbed and or managed without this action today.
Thank you. I'm gonna first call in Councilmember Cunningham, and then I'm gonna ask if Mr. Ruff could help us answer that question. Could this be done with those other grant funds? I also want to lift up something that was said in that healing is so important here. That's a big contribution, Councilmember Cano, that you made to our official act of council, the resolution about transforming our police department. And for that, use of art and artists for that work, I recognize is incredibly important. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. Just for clarification, it was transforming public safety, not just policing. But I wanted to ask around, so we already have passed amendments that do not have specific line items. So I just want to name that. What procedurally, like if, let's say we pass this one as well, because we've already passed some, like can we ask for the authors of these amendments to work with the police department to come back with specifics? I don't feel particularly comfortable with the fact it feels like we're kind of holding colleagues to different standards right now, because what's being brought up again is around the vagueness without a specific line item. I obviously have my perspective around specificity and ultimately like how that plays out with budget for the department heads being able to move money around. However, I understand and respect that is the level of discipline that's being asked. So just procedurally, I'm kind of curious about how do we navigate moving forward if we've already passed some that do not have that level of specificity to be able to reach that without holding back on this particular one, which in my opinion is holding our colleagues to different standards.
Thank you for that comment. I do agree with it. I think we really need to know the trade-offs here, and the higher the dollar figure, in this case, the first two were fairly small in comparison to this and the next one. I think we really need to know what the trade-off here is that we're making within the police department, because in my conversations with council leadership and with the mayor's office, our exercise in this entire revised budget, which was to account for COVID shortfalls mostly, and then deal with some of the other additional expenses due to COVID, the strategy was to avoid needing to cut into staff because of how difficult it is in 5 months of the year to make up a cost like that. And I do think these things come very close and probably go into the need to cut and furlough staff. And overtime that is absolutely necessary as first responders. So I think I just can't say it strongly enough. I think it's imperative that we know what the trade-off here is that we are making. Are there any additional comments or questions? One other thing I wanted to mention. In those conversations with the mayor and council leadership and myself about how we would come up with a strategy, one of the real difficulties of where would we make cuts within the MPD budget is that there are only 2 one-time change items in our whole 2020 adopted MPD budget. The first one was for co-responders, and we didn't want to cut that. And the second piece was about getting MPD out of the intellectual property business, and that is where you did see the proposed cut from the mayor, which was to the workforce director and automated pawn system change item. Let's see, I'm sorry. Thank you, Council Vice President Jenkins. I'd like to hear from Mr. Ruff about the Council Vice President's question about additional grant monies.
Yeah, Madam Chair, maybe I can ask Council Vice President for clarification on the question. Was she referring to the email that I sent out a few days ago regarding the $70,000 cut to the arts program, or was it regarding specifically one of the grants?
Council Vice President?
I do believe it was related to the email that you sent out earlier this week, and the grant funding is a program in CPED, $50,000 grant that was just announced yesterday to preserve African American history as it has been sort of formulated in a response to the civil unrest. So the art that has been promulgating our city, you know, these funds are to have community engagement around what should be done, how do we rebuild these communities. I think many of the same goals that Councilmember Cano is trying to accomplish through the Creative City Making Challenge.
So, Chair Palmisano, then to answer specifically Council Vice President's question, earlier I emailed that I made a mistake in the coordinator's recommendations to the mayor, even before the mayor made a determination, that we had suggested that if there was a cut to the coordinator's office, it was better to come out of sustainability then out of the Creative City Challenge, but that message didn't get to the mayor's office in time for them to reflect that in their final issuance of the recommendations to the council. So our recommendation was no cut, and that was $70,000 to Creative City Challenge, and instead that coming out of the sustainability area. Now, given the events of the last kind of 24 hours with the shifting of money, it's clear that there's been some additional prioritization from the council, where Councilmember Cano, as I understand it, and ask her to clarify, is increasing the amount to the Creative City Challenge. So restoring not only that $70,000 cut, but increasing to another $80,000 for the 150. But I certainly could be wrong on that, but would like some clarification, but that's my reading. And then the money that was to be utilized from sustainability then in an earlier action by Council President was reallocated to someplace else. So we are ending up with many streams of money going different places, and certainly would look for clarification if my interpretation of that is not right from the budget director or any of the council members.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, so I believe that earlier in the email life of our lives here this week, there was a conversation about restoring $75,000 to the Creative City Challenge by taking from sustainability. I believe that we already allocated the sustainability money in previous motions today. I think it was the fire training motion, unless we're hoping to double dip from sustainability, taking two different $70,000 amounts. I'm not sure if it was the same source or not. But basically what my amendment here is saying is we need help right now from artists, and artists need the help of the city right now. They need jobs, they need gigs, they need to be employed. And I would like us to take that money from the police department. I think that council members right now are going at it alone, trying to devise these very large and complex and very time-intensive community engagement processes where conflict is rising, where many people are trying to participate, and we don't have enough vehicles created for them to be plugged into, such as 38th in Chicago, such as the 3rd Precinct site, some of the other sites that were negatively impacted by the civil unrest, whether it was breaking down windows or buildings or burning them, etc. All of that work needs careful tending to, and it needs capacity, and we need it now. We can't wait until August and then December and then next year in February for that money to be rolled out. This is our new reality today. This is our COVID-19 response. These are all related. So regardless of, I guess, whether or not the sustainability money is there or not anymore, this amendment itself is saying we know that there can be a $150,000 cut to the police department that can be redirected to support community safety efforts, community engagement efforts, de-escalation efforts led by artists, centered on healing, centered on recovery, centered on economic redevelopment there to restore what was, what was part of a very difficult moment in the lives of many folks, and I think the money's there, and I think it's okay for a chief to decide where that money's going to come from, and it falls in line with the previous actions we just took earlier today. So I don't want my amendment to be held to a different standard than another council member who happens to be a male council member. I mean, I think that it's important for us to demonstrate that we're making decisions around the same values, and I think this squarely fits in with that racial equity value of, again, creating jobs for artists who are already on the ground doing some of this work, who can help us sustain that work. And I know that Council Vice President and I, and as well as many city department leaders, have acknowledged that we need to bottom line some of this community-based work that's being done right now for free, that nobody's bringing money to the table for because we haven't had a chance to have this discussion. So I think that out of the $193 million that the MPD department has, surely we can find $150,000 to give to hire some local artists of color who have deep expertise in the community engagement processes that our communities are hungry for and that our city needs in order to heal, to repair, to grow and to build. So I think that I think this makes sense, and I don't think it's going to put us in a difficult position. I think it's actually quite clear where we're going and what we're doing.
Thank you. There's a few people here in queue. Was somebody just trying to jump in, a staff member with a clarification? I'm not seeing any. I do want to point out and assert that everybody on this council, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, is on the same page with the need for the kinds of healing that are being discussed here. I think the difficulty here is about the source and how we're equivocating about the source. I did ask these same questions earlier in the amendments of the other person bringing these basic one-time cuts, and I am concerned because of the places that I've seen when there was more detail about where cuts could potentially even come from in the police department. There was significant money being taken out of the body camera contracts, for example, and I don't agree with that. I think we need that kind of transparency for our current MPD department. I want to call on Councilmember Cunningham, who has been patient and waiting, and then Council President, and then Council Vice President Bender. Those are the people that I still see here in queue. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The follow-up that I would like to ask, and Council Vice President Jenkins kind of spoke to this a little bit. So if we were to move this money, regardless of where it comes from, but like once the money, if the money is moved, then is it then going to be open for an RFP, or is it going to be specifically for artists on Lake Street and 38th in Chicago? Because there are Northside artists who could benefit from it too. So I'm just kind of curious, like, are we looking at then opening up an RFP, or is this specifically being moved over for artists, like specific artists or specific locations already decided?
I'm gonna, I know that Councilmember Kano wants to respond to that and another question from the Council Vice President. If we could give Councilmember Kano just a minute to prepare her thoughts on that. I'm gonna call on the Council President and then ask Councilmember Kano to respond to both of those questions, that one and the one from Council Vice President. Council President Bender.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I put myself in queue a while ago when there were some questions about the funding source in the coordinator's office. So that is the source that was used earlier for the jobs training and youth development programs. I really support the intention of this and and certainly the need to invest in activities at 30th in Chicago. I know there have been a lot of conversations with the city and other partners around how to proceed with the intersection there and resources that could be brought to bear. I feel like in terms of the package of shifts that we're making now, I feel more confident about some of the other items that are coming, and I think some things just in terms of like the level of detail around violence prevention, and I just so I just want to be transparent before we get to the vote that I'm not sure I can support this item today because just of the specificity around how the funding would be spent, and not I agree that that this is taking the same approach that Councilmember Gordon did earlier. So it's more just about needing more information about all the conversations that have happened around the 30th and Chicago specific investments and the way that this strategy fits into that and all of the other goals that have been described. So I just wanted to be transparent about where I was at for this item.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano, did you want to jump in again?
Yeah, definitely. So just as background information, the Creative City Challenge is a program that is administered and run by the City of Minneapolis. It is not a specific nonprofit organization that we would be awarding a direct allocation of $150,000. So the city coordinator's office houses the Creative City Challenge program. The one thing that I can offer, I would still like to take a vote on this today because I think it's really important for us to show the artists in our community that we're serious about getting their support and getting their support now, because like I said, myself and other council members are really going at this alone in terms of trying to figure out how to put a community engagement process together that helps us to heal and to come up with the future vision of some of the areas that have been impacted by the murder of Mr. George Floyd. And so specifically speaking to some of Councilmember Cunningham's concerns, there are no there is no earmark for one site right now. This is kind of it. What I'm thinking about is if we can vote on this today and go ahead and codify the support and identify that it's coming from the police department and then work together, and I'd be happy to kick a draft to you all over the weekend to come up with a staff direction that we can vote on next week that brings more specificity to how the use of funds can be entertained by staff. So, you know, a lot of times this work happens in many different ways. We can do the staff direction, or we can have the meeting with staff and tell them what our values and our vision and our direction is based on what we're hearing from our constituents. Sometimes a lot of the staff already have some of those frameworks. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. This isn't a new program we're creating. This is adapting a program that we already have that has been able to hire artists in our city to produce public art, to be able to adapt to our new reality. And we really do need to lean on these folks now because we don't have council member capacity to be going to 100 meetings a month and figuring out, okay, so who's going to lead the process and how are we going to do this? And it's basically just falling on our shoulders. We really do need to open up that space of participation, resource it, bring capacity to it. So I think this amendment is good. I think the intent is pretty clear, and I would be happy to work on a staff direction with Councilmember Jenkins and Cunningham and Bender to further specify and direct how these resources would move throughout the enterprise and into the community in a way that aligns with all of the values we talked about today: transparency, community engagement, and RFP process, which are all parts of the work that the Creative City Challenge already does. They have a committee of residents and artists that pick the artist team. There's a heavy vetting from our Arts Commission and our other staff in our city who do this work. So we have a pretty sophisticated system that's ready to put this money to work. We just need the resources to be there.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with the intent of the proposed amendment. I think that Councilmember Cano is spot on in that is the work that needs to be done, and as one of the council members who is feeling very much alone in dealing with the international issue that has become 38th in Chicago, I absolutely need artists, volunteers, council members, state legislators, everybody who has an interest and concern about this community to be engaged. I am actually a little concerned about the Creative City Challenge leading that effort, in that, the thing that I am hearing most of all is that this work needs to be Black-led, and I'm not sure that the Creative City Making Challenge process really supports that. I really believe that this work can be resourced through other mechanisms. I've already mentioned a couple, and I think that there are many groups that are out there that are willing to support that process. And so I'm really challenged by supporting this recommendation at this moment.
Thank you. I want to say to my colleagues about this, this amendment is about much more than money and funding. This is about healing and the use of art and artists for that work. And I really want to lift that up. It's a really important endeavor. I also want you to feel like, to my colleagues, particularly Council Members Cano and Jenkins, you're not alone. We are all in this together. I am looking forward to the presentation by staff on July 24th to see what that plan is to center Black and Brown voices in this conversation, to center Black and Indigenous voices as to the kind of public safety transformations that come next. And I know that we don't have that yet back from staff and won't until next week. Mindful of just the time, Councilmember Cano, did you want us to do a roll call and see if there's support for this now? And then if there isn't, to see if this could come back in some other way, or do you want to just withdraw this motion? It's up to you.
Yep. I actually, I would love to have this motion be co-authored by multiple people, specifically the artist on the City Council. I think, today's budget meeting is important because it helps to create the space for those conversations. And, I personally have to apologize for not being more available. You probably know that I have the city's largest outdoor unregulated homeless encampment in Powderhorn Park, and so that has really taken time out of my physical day. And so typically I would have bugged many of you nonstop to get us to a good amendment here today, but it's been really challenging to balance all of the work that we're doing to abolish the police department, create a new safety system, respond to the homeless encampment, and then be able to talk to 12 council members on these amendments. So I agree with a lot of the feedback that has been shared today. I would love for this amendment to be successful. I'm not interested in making a point and not having it go through. I really do want this work resourced because we need that capacity on the ground, and artists bring a set of skills that I will never have, and that a lot of council members, even on this dais, won't be able to bring, because we're so split in so many different ways. And so I would say that if I can work with if other council members are willing to work with me to bring this back, I don't want this to die, and I don't want this to get kicked down the road to the point where it doesn't go anywhere. We do need help identifying those sources, because nobody wants to give up the money now. Everybody wants to keep what they have. So it really is about, well, what's our priority? Is it policing, or are we trying to build a new future here? So I'll withdraw the motion today in the hopes that there is interest from other council members to really find a way for this to be successful next week.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to say that Councilmember Cano withdraws her motion, that Council Vice President would very much like to work with you on that. And Councilmember Ellison, did you want to say a couple words? Sorry, I removed it before you could, but go ahead, please.
No, it's totally okay. I just wanted to, just because I hadn't jumped in yet, but I probably would have supported the amendment as is. I'm sorry I didn't speak up a little bit sooner, but despite it having been withdrawn, I'm absolutely just wanted to voice, like Council Vice President, that I'm absolutely willing to work with Councilmember Cano to get this to a good place and to shore up some of the details. So I appreciate this coming forward.
Thank you. I think that's great that we have all of our artists here on the council ready to jump in and make this better. Next, we have amendment number 10. Councilmember Cano, the motion, just to clarify, just to make sure and jump in if this is wrong, is before us on the screen. And I will have Director Intramural read the motion, and then I'll have you speak to it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, amendment number 10 is a motion by Councilmember Cano amending the 2020 Mayor's recommended revised budget in the general fund for the health and police departments, increasing the appropriation in the general fund for the health department by $50,000 one time for the Office of Violence Prevention to provide training, technical assistance, supplies, and implementation of paid community safety patrols that help crime hotspots and homeless encampments throughout the city, reducing the appropriation in the general fund for the Minneapolis Police Department on a one-time basis by $500,000.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate your time here. This specific amendment's intent is to respond to the hundreds of people who have formed their own community safety patrol systems to keep their blocks and their neighborhoods safe in this time of deep transition. Just two days ago, or maybe yesterday actually, I was out meeting with a group of residents on 18th Avenue South and Lake Street, and I was actually invited there by our Attorney General, Mr. Keith Ellison, who also toured the site previously and said, you know, Alondra, you have to come down here. These folks need your support. And these folks have been patrolling their own community for a long time now. They've even built their own block, what would you call it, like a gate into their street, into their block, because MPD and myself and others haven't been able to solve the crime and safety issues there. And so folks are really feeling like this is the time to be given the resources and the tools to put their own ideas to work. And so what this amendment does, it recognizes and acknowledges that new reality we're in, and it responds to it. I know that we've heard a lot of amazing things about the Freedom Riders on the north side. I don't know what we're calling ours on the south side, but I did hear from the groups that were there yesterday that there's about 500 people across the city doing this community patrol, and they're talking to one another and they're connecting. And what I'm hearing from, excuse me, from other residents is that they want a uniform approach at how to do that community patrolling. They really want to have access to a unified training so that it can build the capacity of folks to interrupt violence, to de-escalate, to address conflict, because they're not feeling like they can get that support anywhere else. And so they're really asking our local jurisdiction to step in and to provide those supports. So ideally, this would be $500,000 coming from the Minneapolis Police Department to help resource those groups, to pay folks to do some of that work, to provide training on a lot of these themes and issues, to provide some supplies. I think some people talked about like having radios and things like that. So again, just acting as a conduit to help our communities potentially, if we approve this, address that pressing need that is really rising in certain areas of our city. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councilmember Connell, for bringing forward this amendment. I just want to speak specifically a little bit to where this funding could go within the Office of Violence Prevention, where I think that it most appropriately fits. First off, just say that the number one request that I hear, that the OVP hears from community is, and those who experience violence, is that folks want the opportunity to create their own solutions and that they know will successfully address the violence. We have the Blueprint Approved Institute in the Office of Violence Prevention. I feel like that doesn't get raised and praised enough locally. It's nationally recognized as a best practice in which they do exactly this, the training, technical assistance with the organizations and the groups that are closest to the violence on the front lines to be able to understand how to do their work best. Currently right now about 85% of those funds go that currently it's not super well funded, but about 85% of those dollars go specifically to North Side activities, and so being able to expand it would allow for there to be maybe even a South Side specific cohort of organizations. So additional resources would be able to help with that specifically. I'm going to speak once we kind of move through things a little bit more. This addresses like an immediate need, but I think that we can even expand on that further with some work that I'm doing as well that really speaks also to this. But I will save that additional information for later. But this money is very needed for us to ensure that community-led safety strategies are actually being deployed during this time of increased violence, because what we know is that community has the solutions to the problems community faces, and so it's our responsibility as a city to invest in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to speak to this motion? I think that this doesn't. Thank you, Council President.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciated Council Member Cunningham chiming in, and I just wanted to note that it seems that we have quite a lot of potential funding opportunities in the Office of Violence Prevention that are ready to go, and so I appreciate Councilmember Kano bringing these forward today, and so I'll be supporting this. I did want to note that as we get from here to the final markup, I'm imagining that there may be some, further coordination on things that council members have been working on separately, or that we're hearing about today, and that we'll be able to, perhaps align and understand for the final markup. So. And I know that Councilmember Cunningham talked about some of that potential work just now, and maybe we'll be elaborating further in later items for in this meeting. So I just wanted to note that in my mind, I have been thinking about it as this work being really connected to the things that I've heard as possibilities for funding violence prevention generally.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to this item? I too want to lift up the intentions behind this motion, similar to the last one, but I also want to raise the same concerns here about cumulative impact when we are making blanket cuts in any department, in this case, a first responder department. Again, 80% or more of MPD budget is staff. And some of the things that I have seen is the only places to take things from in our police department include body camera programs and investigations. And I'm not sure that those are the right places within our city, though I agree that this work is quite urgent. So with that, Councilmember Cano, I would ask if you would be willing to delay and find more specificity with the source. But if you like, I am also happy to call the roll and move your motion forward.
I would like to move forward with this motion, Councilmember Palmisano.
All right, thank you. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Reich.
Aye.
Gordon. Councilmember Gordon.
Wake up.
You may have to hit *6 to unmute yourself if you're on the phone. Okay, I will return to him. Councilmember Cunningham.
Aye.
Ellison.
Aye.
Goodman. Councilmember Goodman.
No.
Jenkins.
Aye.
Cano.
Aye.
Bender.
Aye.
Schrader.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Fletcher.
Aye.
Councilmember Gordon. Chair Palmisano.
No.
There are 9 ayes and 2 nays.
Thank you. That motion carries. With that, colleagues, we've completed the packet of prepared amendments. So I will open the floor and ask if there's any further amendments that may be ready to be introduced today. Seeing nobody jump right in, I do want to call on my colleague, Councilmember Fletcher. He has had some proposals that he has been working on, and we were on the phone even very, very late last night working through them. So I'd like to yield the floor to him first. Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano, and thank you to all of my colleagues. I know this meeting is getting long, but I do want to provide a little bit of detail about what I'm working on, both so that you all can work with me on it and think about the best way forward in some of this, but also so that it can be a part of the content of the public feedback that we get at the next public comment period. So I've been focusing on amendments that would think about functions that MPD currently serves that are not going well, and they're not policing functions. They're actually functions that most departments work with the rest of the city in a more coordinated way. And one of the unique things about MPD, and I have often argued one of the problematic things about MPD, is that it operates in an island and doesn't end up interacting with the rest of the city as much because it has so many self-contained services. And so I'm going to be bringing proposals that correct some areas where we're underperforming as a city, and it's, I think, diminishing the public trust in some important ways, and where we can do better. And so I'll be bringing, I'm working on an amendment that would shift the data records management function from MPD to the clerk's office, where it's done very well for the rest of the city, and I think we can produce better results that way. I am working on bringing an amendment that would shift the communications function from MPD to the communications department, which I think could bring us a more trusted ability to communicate about crime and safety in our city. We've seen a lot of missteps, and we've seen, frankly, a lot of frustration with that department, and so I'm working on an amendment to bring that. And then I think we have two kind of important community outreach functions that exist within MPD, and I think in general there's some very good people doing some very good work and also not getting a lot of support and consistent supervision and guidance. And so I think we could produce better outcomes if the violence prevention work and the outreach work that's happening currently within MPD in perhaps a less organized way than it could be was happening in the Office of Violence Prevention and within our community outreach function as a city. And so I'm exploring those amendments as well. And so that'll be a set of 4 amendments, and I'm certainly supportive of my colleagues' efforts generally to fund the work of OVP. I think the one of the things that we need to be looking at as a city is recognizing a shift in staffing numbers that has nothing to do with any budget action taken by this council and everything to do with the attrition we heard reported this morning. Really thinking about what are the ways that we can make sure we're providing response and doing prevention work and response work throughout the city in a way that make sure that we're still getting people's public safety needs met and starts to enact some of the transformation that we've promised as a city. So so in any case, look forward to those coming through. Those obviously have human resources components that I want to make sure that I've really had a chance to get right, and so that's why I didn't bring them today. I want to get the details right on some of that work and make sure that we're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's on that. So look forward to that coming forward on Wednesday, and know that if you've got strong opinions one way or the other about any of those functions as they're currently operating within MPD, that we are actively looking at the best way to support and locate those services so that they are trusted, so that they perform to our city standards, and so that they're supported. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with the committee. Councilmember Cunningham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm not bringing forward any specific amendments today, but I did want to speak to some items that I'm working on, generally speaking, because of the fact that we are experiencing such a spike in violent crime. We have to be thinking about what are we going to do to respond to this in the immediate, because literally lives are being lost. I know that there was there's an urge to wait and not make structural changes. However, like living in the thick of this myself, I can say that like we cannot wait with what we're experiencing every day. So our Office of Violence Prevention is leading life-changing work for the clients that they work with, but they currently are unable to make the population level impacts we want to see because we have not invested in the Office of Violence Prevention strategy enough for them to do so. So as we get serious about reimagining public safety in our city, I think it's important for us to remember that we are not starting from scratch. We have the opportunity to identify what's working and scale it up to have the impacts that we urgently need in real life, everyday folks on the ground. So as I said, I'm not bringing forward any specific amendments today with funding because there is more work that needs to be done in that area, but I want to name to my colleagues and for the public record some specific items that we can move funding forward with during this budget revision to immediately address the spike in crime and violence that we're living in and living with right now. There's a program founded in Chicago by a public health expert, and it's named Cure Violence, which has trained violence interrupters and outreach workers who prevent shootings by identifying and mediating potentially lethal conflicts in the community, as well as follow up to ensure that the conflict does not reignite. So that can be for up to months afterwards. This street outreach prevents retaliation mediates ongoing conflicts, and remains connected for as long as needed to ensure conflicts do not become violence. Investing in this strategy will tie together the next step in group violence intervention efforts, so our hospital-based program and then our violence intervention program. The Office of Violence Prevention has identified a number of small organizations with deep ties to group and gang culture. These organizations, the folks who are in these organizations and running them, have the rare, incredibly valuable asset of having enough credibility with the folks who are shooting the guns to get them to put those guns down. Many of these organizations already actually have relationships with the city, specifically because of the Office of Violence Prevention through the Blueprint Approved Institute, which I mentioned, which increases the capacity of those closest to community violence so that they're better equipped to help keep their community safe. So I've been working with the Office of Violence Prevention, a national partner, Cities United, around how do we actually operationalize violence interrupters here in Minneapolis. So we have the ability or the opportunity to be able to fund up to 5 neighborhood-based teams of 15 to 20 people staffed in particular areas during critical days and times. We are looking at 2 north side teams, one divided between the highs and the lows, which is kind of how the gang violence is divided up. Then 2 south side teams, one on Lake Street, the other on 35th through 42nd in Chicago, that area. 2 nightlife teams, one downtown, the other uptown, and a team in Cedar Riverside. To operationalize this through the end of the year will be a $1.1 million investment. I know that's a lot of money for what we're talking about right now, but this investment will save lives by preventing the violence rather than simply responding to it once the harm is already done. I also just want to speak to a couple of other Office of Violence Prevention investments that would assist in shifting the paradigm for public safety in our community. First, we need about $250,000 to allow increase social service referrals for clients who are brought in through the Cure Violence strategy, allowing for us to be able to have that work come in-house, and so it allows for more flexibility. Folks who are participants in group violence intervention, Next Step, and hopefully Cure Violence, they need help finding immediate housing. Sometimes it's because of the fact that they're living out of their cars or they're couch surfing, or because they're not safe where they are. So folks cannot be stabilized and get out of a life of violence and crime because they cannot access housing due to their criminal records or unlawful detainers on their rental records. So we need some additional support with being able to help these folks get stably housed and so that they can start reestablishing rental histories. The last thing that I'll speak to is the Office of Violence Prevention infrastructure overall. It is very understaffed in ways that make it challenging for them to scale up impactful work. At the least, we really need 2 more staff. One to provide the day-to-day management of the service, relationships, and contracts related to group violence intervention, Next Step, and Cure Violence, and the other to help provide the day-to-day management of services, relationships, and contracts related to sexual assault, sex trafficking, and domestic violence. The cost of the staffing would be around $170,000. Councilmember Connell already helped to address the $500,000 that also is a gap with being able to boost the Blueprint Approved Institute and community-based safety strategies. I say all this because it's important for us to get specific about what it means to reimagine public safety and what that looks like in practice. We said as a council, we want to reimagine public safety, and this is our pathway forward. I asked my colleagues to work with me to address these urgent needs and for the public to provide feedback as we move forward. I will share all of the information and more specifics publicly as well as with my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I want to go back to the last vote. I understand that Councilmember Gordon was trying to vote but couldn't get off of mute to do so, and the clerk does need to hear his voice requesting that his vote on the last motion be counted. So Councilmember Gordon, are you there now? You may need to press *6. Councilmember Gordon. Okay, I'll try that one more time at the very end. Councilmember Ellison, you're next.
Madam Chair, I was just talking to our IT team, and it sounds like he is muted. He is unmuted now, so he might need to hit unmute on his phone.
I see. Is it Councilmember Gordon? Councilmember Gordon.
I'm trying to hit everything possible. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
There we go.
Okay. Well, really appreciate the discussion that I didn't get to participate in more fully, and excited about the secure violence issue. I do want to vote yes on the last item, and I apologize for technical difficulties.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, is that sufficient for recording for the last item?
Yes, Madam Chair, I will update the vote on amendment number 10 to reflect a 10-2 vote.
Thank you. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to speak real quickly. You know, part of the reason I've been referring to this budget that we're working on now as the coronavirus budget, it's outside of our normal budgeting process, and I think that sometimes the public doesn't quite know that. But we're going to be sort of having another budget conversation just in the next couple of weeks here. But I do think it's important for us to take advantage of this anomaly and this opportunity to really check in with what the city's needs are. Councilmember Cunningham spoke to the fact that we're not the only city seeing this rise in violent crime, but we are seeing it. And we know that this is common in cities, especially that have experienced a police killing, or in this case, the murder of George Floyd specifically. As we're seeing people losing faith in our public safety, in our current public safety system, as we're seeing communities needing support because of the increase in violent crime, we're also seeing, quite frankly, our police force express a deep resentment of our city and abandoning our city. We're seeing that in the form of officers either resigning or making claims of harm that they themselves caused and taking advantage of that. And I think that we're now looking at a force that is nowhere near the designated 888 that we have allocated for. And I think that there's some huge questions about whether even 888 is the direction that we need to be headed in right now. But regardless of whether or not 888 is the number that we need right now or not, we're not going to have that. We're going to have well under that amount of officers on the force between now and the foreseeable future. And in the meantime, while I'm very aware that the department is probably able to get very creative about how to spend that money anyway, I do think that it's important that we do what we can to not cut positions, but right size the department to what it actually is, so that we can free up any amount of money to and redeploy it into parts of our city that actually want to serve our constituents right now. And so I'm going to be working on that. I wanted to just name that for my colleagues. Again, with the extremely short timeline, we typically have months to sort of have these discussions and work on our amendments. We don't have that here. And so if people are wondering why do things seem either not all the way teed up or a little undercooked, that's the reason why. But despite the rapid pace at which we're moving, I still think it's important for us to take an inventory of what our city needs and to deploy our resources to those parts of the city that actually want to support us, especially when it comes to our communities experiencing that increase in violent crime. So that's all I wanted to say, and signal to the community, the broader public, and to my colleagues. And I look forward to having those discussions moving into next week.
Councilmember Ellison, did you want to, is there any additional detail on a specific proposal that you want to share at this time? Or are you adding import to Councilmember Cunningham's work?
I will absolutely be in conversation with Councilmember Cunningham and others about work that we think needs to be taken to scale in order to keep our communities safe right now. But I also wanted to be clear that I do feel like examining that sworn number is the place to do that right now.
Okay. I need to speak up here and mention something that was said in regards to what I think you mean are PTSD claims, but I just want to make sure that I have that accurate before I do. Councilmember Ellison, were you referring to a rash of PTSD claims from members of our police force?
I was referring generally to the fact that we do have officers for whatever reason, and it's not my place to say what that reason is, but we do have officers who are rushing to find their way out of their obligation to our constituents in a myriad of ways. So.
Okay, I do need to say that in conversations with police leadership, they do assure me that despite this rash of additional crime and violent crime, that they still do show up every day to work and to respond in every way possible across our city. And I just do think that it's dangerous when we're making other kinds of assertions or allegations about motives here when we aren't able to kind of have a more robust discussion about it. Council President Bender.
Madam Chair, real quick, fair point. All motives aside, I do think that we are going to be well under our 888 that we are paying for, and I think that with the urgency of violence that we're seeing this summer, I do think that it's important for us to be responsive and to right size the force. Especially if it is nowhere near averaging that 888 that taxpayers expect and that we've allowed.
I appreciate that, and I understand, and I also appreciate that when our sworn officers are out on disability, even if it's temporary disability due to post-traumatic stress disorder, it is something that, one, we need them to be well, to show up in the ways that we want them to, but that doesn't take any, there's no vacancy savings there. And there's certainly no vacancy savings when we need to backfill them with overtime of other kinds of sworn force. Council President Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to comment on the items that Councilmembers Fletcher and Cunningham have described, and just share very briefly how I've been talking about this with my own constituents in Ward 10. And I know we've gone for a while here with this, but I do think this topic is important and just want to be clear where I am at for transparency. So I strongly support the staff shifts that Councilmember Fletcher described. I appreciate the time that it's taking to get those details, ready. I will note that, I think there are times when everything is aligned and the mayor and the majority of the council and staff all agree, and then things can move more quickly. Even in that scenario, sometimes there are a number of barriers or processes to go through or information to get. It's just a fact that when there is disagreement, things tend to move more slowly. And when staff receive different direction, things tend to move more slowly, and it tends to be harder to get the information needed to make a proposal. So I just wanted to say that I know Councilmember Fletcher has been working in good faith since he took office to really educate himself on the details of MPD staffing. I think among council members, we all look to him and his staff among the council members that really understand the department and has put in a lot of effort to understand the department. And so it's not for lack of effort, I think, that that information isn't available for today. And I do also just want to note that, asking a department to propose how to cut itself is challenging, I think, for any department. We saw some of that in the 15% cuts. So that is being asked across the board. But at some point, we do just need to make the decisions as policymakers. And so, and we are, I think, doing that with as much care and responsibility as possible with the information that we have. So, so I just wanted to say that, especially in terms of the timing and the level of detail of information that we have, that having more support from the mayor will make things go faster. Having clear support from the council will make things go faster. And I think that second one is there from the work that we have done, the staff direction that we passed, for example, that Councilmember Fletcher brought in the last meeting. I also wanted to say that with my own constituents, I have acknowledged the shifting staff realities within the police department, and so have felt uncomfortable making a commitment to a specific financial cut number, in part because of the dynamic that you, Madam Chair, acknowledged, that we have a lower force on the street for a number of reasons, but that isn't translating into cost savings for the city. And just wanting to really understand how we're, as we're investing in violence prevention strategies like the ones that Councilmember Cunningham described, wanting to take the time that we need to see what is happening with the staffing levels in MPD and how that is adjusting. So that's how I've been thinking about those cuts. I do think that there is also a tension between different messages coming out of the police department. And I know I've had MPD officers tell my constituents things that reflect that they're not fully there to do their jobs. I had a constituent tell me that MPD officers said they weren't going to enforce property crime and said, like, I hope you vote. And that's of course super inappropriate for any staff person to say, but I think especially in this time where we're all working to support public safety and make sure every resident of our community feels safe, that those kinds of comments really exacerbate the issues that we have. And that happened to be a weekend when there was a significant amount of violence in my ward, and it really further degrades the trust. And so I don't want to make too much of one statement, but I know that we have heard those statements over the years, and it may be part of what Councilmember Ellison is referring to as well. I also wanted to note that, I think, getting as much, again, just finally getting as much information as we can, from the departments will help us. And I've appreciated the level of detail we've been able to get from finance so far. So thank you to everyone in MPD finance and then in city finance who've been able to provide some of the detailed numbers that we do have. So thank you for those.
Thank you. The idea, the intentions around vacancy savings, around if we have a police force that is more reduced than we had planned for or anticipated, financially speaking, where does that money go, and are there any vacancy savings? I did want to just ask Director Intramural to weigh in quickly on that, just so that we're all on the same page and that we're thinking about this appropriately. So Director Intramural, I wanted to just ask you to help us weigh in a little bit, because we did make some changes with the wage and hiring freeze that impacts the amount of savings, because we're accounting it for that initial cost containment measure part of this budget cycle.
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. So a caveat on the front end, my internet has been dropping in and out, so I didn't hear the entire conversation, but I'll speak generally to the interaction between the phase 2 cuts and any vacancy savings. So, or the phase 1 cuts, excuse me, and any vacancy savings. So the phase one cuts did include, off the top of my head, it's about $3 million associated with the hiring freeze and the wage freeze for MPD. And so what that represents is both any positions that were vacant as of about May, as well as the previously budgeted for, but now given our financial situation across the board, or general wage increases that won't be happening. So those dollars have already been taken out of the MPD budget as a part of phase one. The total MPD budget reduction was about 8.6 million. So now the total MPD budget is around 184 million. So that's the first point. The second point to the question of for the attrition that has happened since, we are not, for any department, the finance department is not capturing savings associated with vacancies as we go. But rather those dollars are used for a number of things, be they payout of vacation or comp time that's been accumulated over an employee's tenure, and or in the case of MPD, because it's 24/7 staffing operation, they are in many cases used for overtime to backfill those productive hours. I don't have an analysis in front of me to share with you in terms of what the ratio is of any dollars saved through the attrition over the remainder of the year, and what would need to be still used and what's available to be captured. That's something that we could work with MPD Finance as well as HR on in the coming weeks, but it's a complicated analysis that will take time.
Thank you. I do want to just point that out. The details here are incredibly important, and they matter. And I really wish to ask my colleagues to give our budget staff and actually all of our city staff that are asked to respond to these things an appropriate amount of time. We can't keep wearing out our city staff the way that we are. And just as one example, last night, still being on the phone with city staff, multiple city staff, to try and get some last minute things in for today's meeting. We need to give people more time, and we need to, if we're specific in saying what we need to do, which we are, and I really think there's so much common ground here between not just me and my colleagues, but also with the mayor's office, then we also need to get really serious about what not to do as a city and what to forego in the rest of this year's budget or in next year's budget or anything. So thank you for being mindful of that. Council President Bender, you had one additional point, and then I'll move on to Councilmember Johnson.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize. I did have a third point that I wanted to mention, which is, I think all of these things are so interrelated, and the work that we have initiated as a council to look for ways we can shift non-criminal or non-violent crime out of the police department's budget are in part to better efficiently use those resources that we do have, especially in this economic crisis, for policing. And so I want to be clear, I believe that we need a law enforcement presence in our city right now. And I believe it is more efficient and effective if they are able to focus on preventing and responding to violent crime. And it is one of the reasons that I have long supported efforts to shift nonviolent crime and non-criminal calls out of the MPD. And so to the extent, again, that city leadership can get on the same page about that, it will go faster. If the mayor is more supportive, it will go faster. If the city coordinator is more supportive, it will go faster. If the departments that are receiving the work are ready to go, like Councilmember Fletcher has asked informally and now formally through a staff direction, it will go faster. And I think that will serve our whole community better. So we're asking for tough work for sure, no question. Integrating policing into the city enterprise when it has been so separate for so long is challenging work. But we have done transformational work in other departments of our city. Our regulatory services department completely transformed how they're approaching rental licensing. Our public works department, a giant department, has completely transformed how it approaches street design. And those changes took time, but they also took commitment and leadership and agreement among leaders. And so, you know, I think sometimes we say we agree, and I want to say, if we agree, let's get this stuff done. And if we don't, let's be clear and transparent in public about that, because right now what's happening behind the scenes doesn't feel like agreement, and it's slowing progress.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you spoke to this as well, but I didn't want you to be the only elected leader bringing this up. And putting aside the questions around the budget and the authorized amount, there's a lot of stigma around mental health that's out there. I think we all have a real responsibility to try to reduce that stigma. And when it comes specifically to PTSD, a lot of people, when they think of that stigma, they think that there's some sort of inherent weakness involved with trying to seek treatment if they have symptoms and are concerned that they might have PTSD. And we have so many city staff that are putting themselves out there every day and are at risk of that. We have community members that experience PTSD. We need to take that seriously, and any of our city staff that think they might have that, I want them to hear from us that we support them in seeking the help that they need, and that there's a process around that, and that it's not in contradiction with their commitment to the city or their service, but in fact, seeking help for any mental health issue, whether it's PTSD, depression, anxiety, addiction, is necessary to honoring and fulfilling their commitment to the people of Minneapolis. And if anybody has concerns about mental health, please seek professional help. It is so critical. We want our workforce to be healthy so that they can fully honor that commitment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fletcher.
Thank you, Chair Palmisano. And I think I wanted to expand a little bit on what several of my colleagues have talked about, and specifically your call for a little bit of specificity and sort of thinking about how do we talk about the budget and how do we provide a level of guidance about what information would be helpful as we think about the decision making that we have ahead of us in the next week. Because as we know, we did approve a staff direction last week that asks for some ideas, and if those ideas do come to us in a way that seems like they're worth considering for funding, if there's something that could be stood up quickly, then that's something that I think we're going to need some information about the status of MPD's current operations, right? Because what we know is that when we voted for a budget in December, we voted for payroll for $888. And in fact, the sort of operating theory of the budget deal that we struck was to try to stabilize that funding level, at a pretty stable level. And so that's really what we invested in and what we voted on. And if that's not happening, then it feels like we should update the budget to reflect that, and to make sure that the assumptions that everybody's making about how we cover for that change are assumptions that we would all consent to and agree to, right? Because I think in general terms, the way we make up for staffing shortages, if we have fewer people than we're expecting, is overtime. And I think that if we actually look at 5 months worth of overtime, and if we look at a projected staffing curve that reflects actual rather than what we had budgeted for, I think that we have then an opportunity to have a little bit of public discussion and a little bit of policymaker buy-in about, do we support that much getting spent on overtime? What does that staffing curve look like? Do we really need that much overtime in December, for example, when things are likely to be quieter, especially because it seems like a lot of public events are still not happening. We don't have Vikings games, et cetera. When we look at previous staffing years, and could some of the money that is not getting spent on payroll that we had approved for payroll get put into other kinds of violence prevention strategies if those ideas are there. I think it is important to me that we really focus those efforts on things that do take pressure off of MPD one way or the other, whether it's overtime or whether it's alternative responses. I think it's important that we be focused on public safety. I don't want to just see us funding, whatever thing we're interested in. I think it's very important that people are asking us to transform public safety. So we need to be investing into that in this conversation. But I think it'll help us to make an assessment about whether we have room in the budget and whether we agree with the way MPD might be proposing to adapt their budget to unexpected attrition. If we can have a sort of adjusted representation of, what the transition costs are for people who are leaving unexpectedly, how are we accounting for all of that, and where is that money actually going? And I recognize that there's not necessarily a ton of immediate savings even in a lot of people leaving. But I think it would be helpful for us to have a representation of that so that we kind of understand what parameters we're working with and what trade-offs we're making if we make choices about different investments in public safety than just the sort of default overtime assumption. So that would be my sort of specific guidance to staff around what kind of guidance would be helpful to policymakers over the next week as we think about moving forward.
Thank you. And I want to acknowledge Councilmember Fletcher as vice chair of this committee, and I appreciate your scaling your initiatives to the needs and the complexity of your proposals. And while I know you're anxious about, excited about moving them forward to just make sure that all of the details are in there. These budget choices, they're all projections. If you'll remember, at the beginning of this exercise, when we thought we would be undertaking it in the month of June, the projection of the anticipated revenue shortfall was more like $165 million, and now it is 156. And part of that is we're one further month in to COVID, and some of those other kinds of uncertainties and projections for 5 months of the year versus 6 months are a little bit more clear or a little bit easier to guess. I really also want to urge us all to work together. I urge us all to work together in bringing any further amendments forward in this cycle, and then at the beginning as we start the next annual budget cycle in just a few weeks after this is finalized on July 24th. Please work and have conversations with departments. Please work and have conversations with the mayor's office. There is so much common ground here that we all agree on. I just think we could make a lot of progress, but it does take time to have all of those conversations with each other and with other staff. So let's see. With that, I don't see anybody else in queue. I just want to briefly review our next steps. Mr. Intramural and his team will update the proposed 2020 revised budget documents to reflect the amendments that we made today, and those updated documents will be posted as soon as possible. We are scheduled to conduct a second public hearing on the proposed budget next Wednesday, July 22nd at 10 a.m. Following the close of that hearing, we'll have the opportunity to consider any further and final amendments. After that, staff will finalize those for final action at the adjourned meeting that is planned for next Friday, which is 1 week from today, on July 24th, beginning at 9:30 a.m. On behalf of all of us, I want to extend my genuine thanks to Mr. Intramural and his team for their work, and also Mr. Carl, our city clerk, to help shepherd through all of these revisions and amendments. This is difficult work for us as policymakers, but it is difficult work for all of our staff here as well. Are there any final comments from council members before we adjourn? Seeing none, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.